Hey guys. So Ian had emailed me just wondering my thoughts about the recent Sangamo news. So they had a Q2 conference call, which the market didn't really like, and then Eric Joseph from J.P. Morgan also downgraded the stock and wrote a report and blah blah blah. So I guess the first thing is I'm just gonna quickly go over the notes from the sum of the parts table that that he put out, and it's just pretty sloppy work. So I'm gonna make this quick. It's like 1 a.m. on Monday, so or on Sunday, so I don't want to bore you guys with too much, but for example, he calculated net cash. He added the long-term debt to cash instead of subtracting it. He assumes the hemophilia A program is going to be a success, otherwise Pfizer would not be paying the royalties for net sales. Yet he didn't include the milestone targets, which are 300 million. So it's like he said, all right, it's a success. They're going to get royalty payments, but he didn't include the milestone targets on the sum of the parts. He's also targeting 302 million in cash, and based on their spending their spending rate, they basically he's forecasting an equity raise, but. And you see that in the share count. So the share count is up. But looking at how much his assumption is for the cash they'll have and their cash burn and all that, he's expecting the equity raise to be at $4.50 per share, which doesn't make sense since it's $11 per share right now. So, it sort of makes sense to do it at the current share price since it's hard to predict what's going to go on, what the price is going to be going forward. He also has some other assets that are in the pipeline are worthless, and the milestones and royalties, blah blah blah. So he assigns this to 0, which doesn't make any sense. He also gives no value to the multiplex editing, which is ability to edit multiple genes instead of just one gene like CRISPR, and CRISPR can barely do that. And that editing of the multiplex editing is why Gilead, that huge pharma company, wanted Sangamo to be its partner. So again, that's sort of ridiculous. TXL had a bunch of patents. Sangamo has a bunch of patents. They have about 1,000. No value to that. And again, written down the TXL acquisition to 0. So ultimately, this is just a sign of sloppy work. I don't know if he's doing it quickly. I don't know if there's an intent behind it. If he's skewed negative, so he wanted the sum of parts table to be bad. But that's that. It caused big sell off. Blah blah blah. So that's that. Now, ignoring that, let's look at some notes from Jeffries and a couple other analysts who I think are doing a good job covering it. So management provided commentary on the hemophilia A and Sangamo's positioning. They remain confident in the MPS2 data and expect to put the debate to rest at World in February. So, I don't know how much you've been following the stock, but essentially there was going to be an announcement at ASH in December about their hemophilia A program, which is gene therapy, where they don't actually edit DNA. They inject some into cells and it expresses that, which isn't that revolutionary. A lot of companies are already doing it. It's not really why I like Sangamo, but it is a good thing that they have, and it does add value, which is pretty important. The big thing is the February gene editing, and that's where there was a big sell-off earlier when they announced the mid-dose level results, which I thought were good, but the market wasn't happy since to give a quick summary of that, I know you probably know this, but the enzyme that's supposed to reduce GAGs, so GAGs build up in the body, the enzyme that was supposed to reduce it, they couldn't find with the assay, which is like a test, in the bloodstream, but they saw the GAGs being reduced. Analysts were worried that GAG reduction across multiple patients, across multiple time frames was a fluke, which doesn't make sense, but that's what they're worried about, But I'm going to cover why that actually, there's some great news that came out just these past couple days. I'm going to get into that. So again, the only way to get gag reductions are that they saw the enzyme, and the only way to get the enzyme was with editing. They're going to show all their MPS 2 stuff at World. It's going to be a big reveal. They're going to have evidence to convince editing has happened, and that's the biggest thing, because that opens the door to so many potential revenue streams and milestone payments that the stock being where it's at is just super undervalued. Myself, I'm actually adding right now at these levels as a disclosure. So for hemophilia A, there was the big reason for the sell-off was that they postponed their announcement, which isn't really that big of a deal because it's obvious they're doing it for strategic reasons. So there's a lot of competition right now with BioMarin and Spark on the hemophilia A gene editing landscape. Now, a lot of companies are having issues, like Spark's having issues with negative reactions, and they're having to use high amounts of steroids, and still people are going to the hospital. And BioMarin's having a longevity issue where over time the effect of the gene therapy for hemophilia A seems to be wearing off. So those guys are not releasing any important data soon. So Sangamo felt, you know what? Let's not rush to release this data out. In their slides, they said they got the levels of the clotting factor, which is what you want in hemophilia A, to be above 12% in the current dose they're at now, which by the books is considered therapeutic. But for fast track approval, if you can get it between 50 and 150% of normal, it's just a lot better. So I think they realized, you know what, they can probably ramp up another dose level, not have any negative reactions, and sort of, present that data as the most compelling possible way. I think it makes sense from the shareholders' perspective if they're trying to protect their shareholders, because the MPS 2 data I thought was good, but if it's not breakthrough, amazing, 100% fine, the market can have an adverse reaction. So I think it makes sense for both competitive reasons and for their shareholders. They have a little bit of temporary sell-off, but it makes sense to come out with your best data when you can versus showing your cards. So that's that with this thing. I'm also going to link the two pictures so you can read them yourselves after. And they pretty much cover... This pretty much covers what I've been talking about. Like I said, the big thing is they have no tapering courses of oral steroids, which means that they can go through higher and higher doses, which is important. The Safety and Monitoring Committee of the FDA recommended that the study continues. This is hemophilia A with additional doses, and they're going to present this data from the Alta study after they go through a little higher doses to see what kind of better effect they can get. I think it makes sense both trying to get FDA fast track and accelerated approvals from a competitive standpoint, from a shareholder standpoint. So, I was sort of disappointed they weren't going to announce it, but seeing how the market reacted with the MPS 2 data, I'm fine with it. Although it would present a good buying opportunity for the February data if it did drop, but that's neither here nor there. MPS 2, there was actually good news that came out, and I don't know why. I mean, the market's irrational. That's the only way you can make money, so sometimes it does stupid stuff, especially with small cap biotech. So they didn't release any new data, but the Safety and Monitoring Committee is allowing Sangamo to withdraw enzyme replacement therapy when they want, which is a big thing, because if it doesn't work and they remove the current treatment, the patients are going to be in for a shit show, because they're going to have no treatment that works. So the fact that they gave them the green light to remove it when they want, I think the quote was when appropriate, means that it most likely is working. That was a big thing that people were looking for. When is the SMC going to allow them to taper off ERT? If you look at analyst questions in the previous one, not the most recent one, the previous conference call, that was a question. And that's what analysts were discussing to have a sign that it works. On top of that, they also are allowing 12 to 17-year-olds to be dosed, and the next dose cohort to be all set up and green lit. So that points to solid activity with the fact that they're withdrawing the ERT, the current treatment, and safety because they're allowing 12 to 17-year-olds. And those are the two things that people are going to be looking for in February, and if it's there, it's going to be very big. So we're going to find that out in February. I'm very excited. Again, you can read these more in detail. I'll send them in the email. Finally, this is the big thing. This is insane. So I was going through the internet finding stuff, and I ended up finding this, which is a Sangamo Therapeutics thing for a biotherapeutic summit in March 4th to 8th of 2019. So, and they are presenting a paper called The Development of a Sensitive Quantitative Enzyme Activity Biomarker Assay to Support Gene Editing Clinical Trials for the Treatment of Lysosomal Storage Disease. In regular words, they developed a test that's sensitive to detect enzyme activity to help support their clinical trials. And lysosomal storage disease, MPS2 is that type. It's in that category. It affects the lysosomes. Now, look at the wording of this, which is very key. So, and you might miss it, but it's very important and a big hint. So clinical studies involving gene therapy to treat basically people with MPS II and other diseases in this category with enzyme deficiency utilize an enzyme activity assay as one of the biomarker assays for efficacy evaluations. And again, this is why there was a sell-off back in earlier this semester, because they could not detect the enzyme. So they made a test that is more sensitive. The commercially available diagnostic test is a non-quantitative enzymatic activity assay that uses artificial fluorescent chemicals as a standard. We developed a quantitative assay by incorporating recombinant enzymes as reference standard and controls, with assay sensitivity capable, this is the key part, of quantitating enzyme activity in both diseased and normal ranges. Now, the test they used originally was for healthy levels. So the test wasn't designed to be very, very sensitive to small amounts. Now, the MPS II data was the mid-dose. It's just a safety dose. The high dose is 5 times stronger than the mid-dose. So the mid-dose was not going to have a lot of enzyme activity in the blood, especially since it's being absorbed rapidly by all the cells that are starving for it, which is why you still saw GAG reduction, but it wasn't in the blood because they couldn't see it, the test wasn't made for it, and it was in the cells where it should be. Which is actually good. If it was in the blood but there was no GAG reductions, it'd be like, are the cells able to absorb it? There'd be other questions. Not going to get into that. But the fact that they said it's both diseased and normal ranges makes it clear that the test will be sensitive enough to pick up the enzyme activity that we're looking for in February. So all of these things, you have teenagers being able to be dosed, the Safety and Monitoring Committee saying you can take the people off the current drugs, and that only would happen if it works. Approved for a higher dose. Again, that's a safety thing. You wouldn't raise the dose if there's safety concerns. You look at the hemophilia A. The only reason there was a delay was for competitive reasons, to not screw over shareholders by releasing lackluster data ahead of time, and to explore higher dose possibilities. Since there's been no need for steroids, the doses are being handled fine, so they can raise it, try to get a little bit more efficacy out of the drug, and get better FDA approval, get faster FDA approval. When they're talking with patients, they can show them these better numbers, and overall, from a competitive advantage, it just makes sense to not show your hand. And those are the pretty much the things that are of note for the Q2 conference call. Their cash is fine. It's pretty standard stuff. Not really too worried about the details. When evaluating Sangamo, you have to just look at the science and what they're going to be announcing. And with the stock being $9, $10, $11, in February, when it's announced, it should be above 20, above 30. If you look at other gene editing stocks, who don't even have any, who barely have clinical trials going, all preclinical stuff, they are so higher valued compared to Sangamo. And if I have a whole net present value thing based on percentage chance of approvals and cash flows and all that. And I have a price target of $50 to $100 over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's just with the current pipeline. That's not them adding stuff. That's not the Gilead deals. That's not them getting potentially bought out with all the quality they have. I'd be honestly upset if they got bought out, even if it was for $20 a share, $30 a share, because there's so much more potential in the company. But, it is what it is. So it's been 15 minutes. I think that's long enough. Email me if you have any questions, and I would really hope you guys add more to the position. It's not going to be below 15 as we approach February. As people do more research, as it gets closer to February, it's not going to be below 15. Of course, unless there's a market sell-off, but at that point, it's a wash with everything else. At these high valuations across the board, it's rare to find such an undervalued stock, which, it's not. I'm not having to predict economic cycles. I'm not having to predict consumer demand. It's just predicting the science and looking for clues, and everything points to there's literally no bad news that came out. So that's that. I'm going to wrap this up and send you the link to this along with links and to what I showed on this. But yeah, please try to buy more, even if it's another percentage. I'm coming in for next semester in January, so luckily it's before the February announcement, but I'm going to have to convince people to buy when it's at 15, 20 ahead of February, as long as, the market doesn't crash, which it might before then. So that's actually, yeah, never mind. I'm not going to get into it, but watch out for a market crash. All right. Good luck.